Back in the early days of the 16-bit console wars, Nintendo tried making the SNES CD and failed.
How about a kiss? For luck.
You've got to be kidding.
But I do wonder, is it because of this failure that the Satellaview even exists as it is in the first place? In this mostly uninformed ramble, I will make a case that the Satellaview has a clear connection to the SNES CD. One of the most important considerations for me when theorizing this is the timeline. For the SNES CD specific stuff, I would suggest reading another article or seeing a video on it. Basically, the CD add-on was all but officially dead by the end of 1992. Now, what I'm putting up for display here is an excerpt from the archive of the St. Giga Forever memorial site, which is on, well, WebArchive. Check out the part that's circled here. My ability to interpret Google Translatees tells me that this is the time when Nintendo purchased stock in St. Giga. This stock purchase would be a few months before Nintendo would officially out that the SNES CD's dead. The next notable piece of documentation I can find is this Billboard article. This is basically when the Satellaview was first publicly announced. I'll be referencing this article in some future work. By the way, Sega's first public announcement about the Sega Channel would be 3 months after Nintendo's St. Giga purchase. So if Nintendo knew about it before, it was espionage.
Strange, isn't it?
For most Americans, the extension port on the Super Nintendo system is one of the biggest wasted opportunities. Everyone here knows it was meant for the SNES CD. Fewer know that the Satellaview ended up using it in the end. By the way, some of that mock-up artwork of the Super Nintendo CD gives it a very strange visual similarity to the Satellaview's plastic. Or maybe it's not so strange if, say, they constructed it from SNES CD parts. Nintendo does have a history of that. Remember them Gyromite carts? This is the one that really got me thinking about this. Just listen.
このプログラムは衛星回線を通じて全国のプレイヤーが同じゲーム空間でプレイできる世界で初めてのゲームプログラムです。
SoundLink. It allowed Nintendo to work with high-quality audio without dealing with CDs. Sure, nowadays I'd consider the cons to be not worth the effort in retrospect, but I wouldn't be surprised if someone at Nintendo was thinking that this would ultimately replace the CD format, as completely nonsensical as that sounds. When you think about it even, there's some things you could do with SoundLink that you couldn't really do with CDDA, such as, well, going over 80 minutes, or being able to modify the voices for another run, or giving the illusion, or even the reality, that they were just broadcasting live. No editing and no censorship? Oh, and you wouldn't have to deal with CD stuttering. Wow, I'm totally brainwashing myself here. But yeah, digital audio with no CD. Let's compare Satellaview releases to releases on another platform. I think I'm on to an interesting observation with it. Starting, of course, with BS Zelda, and its predecessor, Legend of Zelda. BS Tantei Club, and its predecessor, see the pattern? Famicom Tantei Club, well, both prior parts. Then we go to BS Shin Onigashiba, and, well, Shin Onigashiba. Probably mangling that pronunciation. BS Super Mario USA? Oh, gotcha! You may call your Doki Doki Panic! What do all these have in common? It's pretty obvious, actually. They're all Famicom Disk System releases. And Nintendo didn't make too many sequels to Famicom Disk System games on standard Super Nintendo. It's almost like the development team thought of the Satellaview as the Famicom Disk System's successor. But for a digital distribution platform, that doesn't really make sense, does it? Well, not unless the Satellaview was also a replacement for something else. It kinda makes me wonder, were any Satellaview projects originally designed for the SNES CD platform? If this theory holds any water, I think that would be a great thing to look into. But until then, I'm still researching. Hopefully no one's gonna comment on this video of, well, that's obvious! Because, you know, if it was obvious, I'm pretty certain someone else would have made a video on it by now, instead of waiting for me to do it with my shoestring budget. On the other hand, if you want to prove me wrong, come at me, bro! Whenever someone asks me what the Satellaview is, I tend to have difficulty explaining it in the short time frame. But maybe with 5 things I could compare it to, it would be a bit easier. Let's see if I can think of some. Let's get to the most obvious one out of the way. The Sega Channel was basically the same core idea, minus, well, satellites and Soundlink. The Sega Channel also had a decent cult fan base in America, so when I bring it up, at least someone's gonna be like, yeah, I remember that thing. Games downloaded from your local cable or satellite provider. That can describe both Sega Channel and Satellaview. By the way, trivia time! Did you know that the Sega Channel was actually in Japan? You probably didn't, because the first I heard of it was back in 2008! I hope to learn more about this one as well. The Satellaview was not the first time Nintendo tried networking. The old Famicom had a Famicom network system, which people mostly used to gamble on horse races. Outside of that, it never really caught on, so no actual games were designed with it in mind. However, this is an important early predecessor to the Satellaview. If you want to read more about it, check out this article on Glitterberry's website. The most successful console add-on ever, and the inspiration for Nintendo to try doing its own SNES CD. You were probably expecting Sega CD, but nope, it's PC Engine. This platform introduced to game consoles the idea of CD audio enhancing a gameplay experience, which would of course give way to other forms of recorded audio doing likewise. After all, even without the CD medium, who wouldn't want voice actors and high-quality guitar riffs in their video games? I didn't exactly expect such recent things to be comparable, but take a look at this Splatoon stuff. Well, not so much the game itself, but how the whole netplay is handled, how the global test fire is handled. Everything's on a schedule! It seems quite apparent. Even if Nintendo doesn't publicly talk about Satellaview very often, it still takes cues from it in their future works. Even some of the less desirable ones. And speaking of less desirable ones... Konami! PT would not normally be on this, but then they pulled that! You know what I'm referring to. That! It has me fuming at the mouth, and I never even played PT. This is entirely just being mad on principle! Imagine waking up one day and just not being able to download your games anymore. That was the Satellaview after June 2000, and now it's PT in May 2015. History repeats itself, very tragically. And who gets screwed over by it? Me, of course! If anyone is willing to donate me a PS4 with PT on it, you are crazy. But I love you for it anyway. No homo, though. And for more normal people who want to donate, I just tried opening up a Patreon. Not expecting much, but anything's appreciated.
Yes, Monopoly! The world's most famous board game is now Monopoly the BS Bullshit game. Here come the players!
For reasons someone like me can't possibly comprehend, Monopoly has a long history of console ports. And, well, most of them have at least some merit to them. But it's kind of unfortunate how no one particular Monopoly game is the ultimate experience, so to speak. For example, I always felt like the NES version of Monopoly played the fastest out of most of the video game variants I've seen. And for that, it's by preference. But I can also see the merit in, say, the DOS port with the flashier graphics, or the PlayStation version with the 3D CGI stuff. And for that, I'll try looking into any particular version. So before we get into Monopoly 2 BS, let's check. Here's a bit of the vanilla version. Ape Software, none other than the creators of Earthbound themselves, decided to try taking on the sequel to Monopoly. I suppose if there's anyone you'd trust with that job, it'd be the creators of one of the greatest JRPGs on the Super Famicom, huh? But then you'd think, how would they get it to work? And the answer to that? Well, they make JRPGs, so let's take Monopoly and make it a JRPG, yeah! I can't wait to take on Kefka and Lavos at Monopoly! Of course, that's not how it actually goes, but that's amusing to think about. But yeah, here we have this Monopoly JRPG where you interact with NPCs and you presumably challenge them in Monopoly in order to become the Monopoly Master, I guess. If this is called Monopoly 2, then by that logic, wouldn't Super Mario RPG be called, like, Super Mario World 3? Super Mario Bros. 5? Something like that? Then again, these are the same guys that made Moonside. I suppose I shouldn't question that logic. Anyway, to summarize the relevance, Monopoly 2 BS is basically based off this game's engine, and it shares many of the same music, graphics, and characters. So let's move on to it now. The placing of the BS on the title screen seems so weird. Anyway, there's a lot of technical jargon about the Japanese release that I can theoretically ramble about, but I don't want to go over 10 minutes, so I'll get to the point about the gameplay details. Monopoly 2 BS cuts the JRPG part of the game out and just sends you straight into a Monopoly match. You might think that's kind of like throwing Ness right in the Gygas, but when you think about it, the world of BSX was already a JRPG, and Monopoly 2 BS heavily interacts with it in regards to your money. So I suppose the JRPG part was a redundancy. But unfortunately, the game isn't really retailed enough accordingly. You're still very much dealing with the AI opponents from the JRPG line. And on that note, why is there no multiplayer mode? I mean, seriously, it's Monopoly. If I really wanted to play with myself, I'd have a lot better options than this. I mean, yeah, the Satellaview didn't have that many multiplayer experiences, but you'd think Monopoly would be the multiplayer experience. But nope! Also, the matches tend to go at a fairly slow pace from my perspective. My first time trying to Red Cup ROM, I was playing for over an hour and a half. Well, playing might not be the best way to phrase it. This sequence. To explain what's going on here, this is basically the game's bartering screen, where players will try to trade properties and money and whatnot. But what this game loves to do especially, that really gets on my nerves really fast, is having the AI be constantly on these screens. And here's the typical pattern. One computer opponent tries to negotiate a deal with the other computer opponent. The other computer opponent haggles and haggles and haggles. And then eventually the deal is rejected. This sequence in and of itself takes 50 seconds, but then it starts again! Now the roles have reversed, but the trade attempt is the exact same deal. And the exact same thing is going to happen. There's going to be a bunch of haggling, and then it's not going to be traded. And the worst part of this? This will happen every turn until there's a drastic change in the status quo of the game. Combined with the points of non-interaction that are more typical in a board game converted to a video game, and you are left stuck staring at a screen for minutes at a time while nothing happens. This may be acceptable in a JRPG-like game, but I just wanted to play Monopoly! And yeah, I know people complain that Monopoly games can go pretty long, but at least with the Monopoly games that go for a long time, you have a bunch of player turns happening. Here, the game is slow, simply because the game is slow. And sometimes I swear the game goes out of its way to be as slow as possible. Every brief pause between a new screen popping up, or before a character moves, feels like lag. And it's not like the PlayStation version where it was for eye candy or something like that. This game doesn't look better than Monopoly 1. I don't see why I'd rather play it than Monopoly 1 yet. And coming from the guys that made Earthbound, that sounds really disappointing. Of course, on the other hand, it's very possible that the game had to be one of those you had to be there sort of things. Looking up the info on the broadcast on various Japanese websites, it said that the game was played during a broadcast of an interview with an actual Monopoly world champion. And I'd imagine for hardcore Monopoly fans that that'd be really cool. In fact, when I think of it that way, maybe a lot of the aspects of the game make more sense if it's just something you just have in the background while you listen to this Monopoly champion talk about his experiences. And as such, it is really, really unfortunate that I do not have any recordings or archival of that. Because really, without it, the game's not really very fun. The main use I have for it is increasing my currency in my BSX saves, but besides that, I wouldn't really recommend it.
Don't be coming back now.
Please excuse the aspect ratio stuff. That's YouTube just being weird with the YouTube editor. Perhaps sometime later on I'll edit all the videos for better consistency in that regard. But until then, as a certain Mr. Riwata would put it, please understand. I was stuck on making a new one of these for a while, but then I downloaded a bunch of MSU1 hacks, and it inspired me to try thinking of what other games would sound good with digital audio. A little rant before I begin. MSU1 hackers, I appreciate a lot of your work, but if there's one critique I could have, it's that your choices for hacking projects are games which are already really good with the audio. I mean, yeah, on a theoretical level, digital audio version of Super Metroid or Mega Man X sounds dandy, but if the original games have really good soundtracks to begin with, then it's just as likely that you could screw something up by using the digital audio, in a sense making the game worse. I felt like the audio choices for the Mega Man X MSU1 hack in particular suffered from this, and as such, my selections here are influenced by this. The selections here have been carefully picked so that the digital audio probably won't be worse. Well, except this first one. Plug time! Super Mario World's music wasn't even designed with the finalized SPC in mind, as thus its game music does not optimally use the SNES sound code. If this had SoundLink though, then Oh, it might be similar to the MSU1 Super Mario World hack, hacked by Khan and with the music assembled by myself. Many of my selections were indeed Satellaview inspired. Try grabbing the hack at romhacking.net. And now for the game that I wish had an MSU1 hack the most. Ninja Gaiden Trilogy is a heavily criticized port, and one of its biggest complaints was about the SPC audio. You could literally make a better soundtrack by just swapping back in the NES music. Whether MSU1 or Soundlink, Ninja Gaiden Trilogy could seriously use digital audio. My personal pick for the musical selection would probably be from Steel Dragon Beat Blade, a nice Dojin album. I love Super Punch-Out! But even with that, I have to say, the soundtrack is really, really weak. It's so weak that I can't find any remixes of it. I don't even know if remixing the tracks would actually make them any stronger. It might be better to just revert back to the NES Punch-Out music, or maybe some picks from the Rocky soundtrack. It's kind of baffling to me how such a really solid first-party Nintendo game can have such a weak soundtrack on the Super Nintendo, but I guess that's what music sounds like after so many punches to the face. So I was trying to think of some video games that had soundtracks which mostly licensed songs, and Rock and Roll Racing was already done on MSU1, so I went with Cool Spot instead. Now the game audio isn't bad in and of itself, but replacing the score with the original songs would probably be a lot better, or it'd at least be difficult to screw up. And for something else to use the original music, the SNES Dracula X was very heavily criticized, especially back in the day when it was first released. But when you boil it down, most of the complaints basically amounted to, why didn't we get the PC Engine version? I want the CD audio, I want to play as a lolly. It's too bad the Satellaview didn't come out in America, because this could have benefited from it. Well, not only did that take way longer than it should've, but it went on a tangent half the time. Hopefully the next video will be a lot more prompt, and have some more actual Satellaview discussion. Hope the videos I put up for padding have been entertaining in the meanwhile. I think I just figured out why Link is not in DS Zelda. There you go. For this video, I will just cite some random trivia about voice actor Kiyoshi Kobayashi, whom was the narrator in BS Zelda.
遥かなる昔のこと。神々はこの世界を創造された。神々はその大いなる力の証として黄金の正三角体トライフォースを残された。
To sell the idea of Soundlink, Nintendo hired veteran voice actors to do roles for their games. Kinda sounds unlike them nowadays, huh? Kiyoshi Kobayashi was among them, and to get the point across about how significant of a voice actor he was, I'll pop in some samplings of his other works, and pray Content ID doesn't kill me. Daisuke Jigen from Lupin the Third.
垢抜けねえ話だよ。女に監視されて風呂に入るとはよ。ま、おめえさんに隠すものは何にもねえがな。
Watari from Death Note, way after the Satellaview, obviously.
Watari.
Avdol from the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure OVA series.
ああ、確かに撃たれた。この眉間をな。だがあの時、ジェイガイルに背中を刺されたおかげで 瞬間のけぞり致命傷には至らなかったんだ。
And now, to make this a bit more weird, Master Splinter from Ninja Turtles.
彼らは私にスプリンターというニックネームをつけた。スプリンターすなわち叩きのめすという意味だ。お返しに私は彼らに大好きなルネッサンスの画家たちの名をつけた。外の世界では彼らは化け物として迫害されるだろう。レオナルドは剣を使わせれば柳生十兵衛より上。
Wait, Jubei? Yeah, Jubei! That Jubei! That's where I heard him before.
今は昔の物語。我が道極めんとする男あり。血生臭い貴様に矜持まとうは偶然ではなかった。
Ah, the Neo Geo fan in me is showing right now. Kobayashi did the voice of the narrator, as well as Yagu Jubei in Samurai Showdown 2 and 4. And as someone who's mostly a video gamer, that's how I recognize that voice.
干渉。出直せ。2本目。
In the Samurai Showdown series, Jubei is a brutal veteran samurai who works for the shogunate, and the narrator is, well, a narrator. Kobayashi is mostly credited with narrator roles, which is probably why he got this role pretty handily in BS Zelda. His voice is deep and clear, which is good for a narrator of folklore, or a smart and experienced elder character. As such, when I hear his voice in BS Zelda, I tend to think of the imagery of a high-ranking officer in the Knights of Hyrule, which would explain why he's constantly giving you game clues. It's almost unfortunate he isn't really a character in his own right. Kobayashi didn't do much work for Nintendo after this one, nor did he do many video games in general. Perhaps someday, though.
とうとう時間がなくなってしまった。
So, how was this one? Hopefully it was pretty decent. If you have any other useful notes to contribute about him, please let me know. Until then, I am totally goofing off with what I currently have. There's a bit of some bonus stuff at the end of this.
Endless group! Hiding cup! Endless group! Endless group!
Satellaview research is tough work, yet there are many reasons I persist and keep trying. Here's 5 of them. Well, ones that are not exactly selfish, like money or YouTube hits. Reason 1. The Satellaview is unique and experimental, an experience unlike most in gaming history. Let me pop that clip again.
このプログラムは衛星回線を通じて全国のプレイヤーが同じゲーム空間でプレイできる世界で初めてのゲームプログラムです。ゲームの音声は PS ならではの高音質で大迫力のゲームが楽しめます。なおこのゲームはゼルダタイムという時間空間にのみ存在するプログラムです。メモリーパックにセーブすることはできません。
Okay, so maybe if you took the Sega CD and the Sega channel and you threw them both in a blender, maybe you'd get something resembling Satellaview? Still not quite the same, though. The combination of satellite data transfers and satellite radio is something that has not been seen in video games before or since, and probably won't be seen again. Reason number 2. The Satellaview was among the most poorly researched platforms 10 years ago, with inaccuracies spread as fact. Heck, even as recently as last year, I was correcting this Bandai stuff. Ugh. Misinformation was able to spread so easily because of a lack of proper documentation of the Satellaview experience. Even today, there's probably something even I'm accepting as fact that is dead wrong and needs to be corrected, but I need more research to find out. Until then, don't listen to anyone who claims they have a prototype of Mario 64 and a Satellaview 8M pack. Whoa. Reason number 3. The Satellaview has a lot of undocumented, unknown software and games which people would probably want to play. I mean, I think it's a crying shame that titles like SimCity and Mario have titles that are exclusive to this platform, which you can't even really play anymore. Even emulation doesn't quite cut it, since besides the issues with emulating games and the lack of SoundLink audio, you would have to deal with the fact that so many of the games just aren't ROM dumped and archived to play at all. The amount of unarchived data for the Satellaview is overwhelming. It sounds like it'd be a Herculean task to even try to take a chunk out of it. Thankfully, I wasn't raised on video games with casual and easy modes. Reason number 4. The Satellaview is the most unfortunately neglected part of Nintendo's video game history. In spite of all the releases made and all the effort put into it, flash forward a decade later, and Nintendo hardly even so much as talks about it. It doesn't get WarioWare microgames or Smash Bros. Trophies. It doesn't get talked about with the same respect the Famicom Disk System or the 64DD does, the latter being especially baffling. Also, very few third parties refer to the Satellaview in anything at all themselves. Kaizo Chojin Superman Zero is not in Masaya's canon list of games for some bizarre reason. Generally, this kind of thing happens to games which are considered bombs, but quite frankly, even the Virtual Boy is treated better than this. They don't try to whitewash that from history. And speaking of that, reason 5. To paraphrase a statement, history, neglected and forgotten, is doomed to repeat itself. As I've already previously stated, Nintendo has, well, neglected the Satellaview, and they kinda tend to prefer not really talking about it. But I fear that Nintendo's lack of acknowledgement of the Satellaview has caused some things that could have been prevented to have gone unnoticed until it was too late. I'm looking at you, Konami. Right now, I've been enjoying playing Splatoon, but I kinda worry about it at the same time. What will happen to Splatoon's online experience 5 years down the road? I would suggest reading this Ars Technica article when you're done watching this. In fact, it's apt enough to my situation that I can just do a quick Photoshop here. Presto! So, have any of you other Nintendo Creator Program guys got, like, an E3 invite from Nintendo Brand Ambassador Program? Yeah, there's no way I'm gonna be able to make it to E3. Dagnabbit! This about summarizes this. Once upon a time, there was a golden age where Capcom actually made Mega Man sequels. Thus, an era of prosperity reigned among gaming kind. Or something along those lines, anyway. But enough throwing my rose-tinted glasses at you all. This ain't about Mega Man, it's about clones of Mega Man. Yeah. There were quite a few of them back in the day, huh? Kaizo Chojin Superman was actually not exactly among those at first. It was a game developed by NCS and Masaya. And, well, The first game, I don't know what to describe this as. It doesn't look very good though. Now the second game here, now this looks more like a Mega Man, but those run and jump physics are kinda off in my opinion. It also seems fairly slow somehow. And the third game, I guess it plays like ActRaiser? Okay, I seriously need to actually play these sometime. Can anyone provide me a PC Engine Duo? Anyway, let's get talking to the game I actually do know about. Kaizo Chojin Superman Zero, which was released on Satellaview. The game has very little in common with the previous Superman games in regards to characters or gameplay mechanics, which makes me wonder why they even gave it that title in the first place. If I were to give it a title to better describe the game, it would probably be Mega Man Fists Everything. As soon as I take control of either of the player characters, if I walk or if I jump, to me, it feels like Mega Man walking and jumping. I mean, like, not like exactly, but really close. And while your basic attacks are melee attacks instead of projectiles, well, Mega Man Zero did that. Further rubbing that feel into me is the graphic style of the game. It looks like Mega Man, really. I mean, look at Raita here. He's just like Mega Man without his helmet and wearing boxing gloves. I mean, I bet that would basically be how Mega Man would look if he was a guest character in Punch-Out! As such, it's difficult for me not to describe the game as anything other than, what if Mega Man was somehow a beat-em-up? Like, if you crossed Mega Man and Final Fight together. Except it's not some dumb fan game. I always get amusement out of comparing this to Mega Man 7, which I felt played way too slow for some reason. Thus was a very disappointing entry. Superman Zero is also faster than Mega Man and Bass. Bass. Rockman and Forte. Anyway, Superman Zero, with its action and platforming elements, has fairly simple gameplay. You run towards the right, and you beat stuff up if you feel like it. And boy, is it fun to punch things until they explode. Simple, yet satisfying. Most of the enemies, including these guys that look like the Putty Patrol from Power Rangers, are just waiting to have your fish smashing their face. Blow stuff up, collect the items they drop, and move on and beat the level. The game has a story that's mostly told through cutscenes like this. Obviously, it's difficult to read all the Japanese, but thankfully, you don't really need to in order to simply enjoy the game. That being said, a translation would be nice. Mozilla, who made his own BS Zelda patch, looked into this once, and he told me that all the text is hard-coded in the game. Ouch! Your score doubles as an experience point system, and when you get enough points, you level up, which raises your maximum health. This lets you take another hit before you lose your one life, and plus one of your credits, which allows you to continue playing. And in a typical game I play of this, I end up accumulating enough health that it's difficult for me to die at all. Honestly, I wish I could kinda shut it off. The game already feels pretty easy as it is for me. And the latter levels aren't really balanced with the increased health in mind, so it gets even easier. Most of the bosses are fairly interesting set pieces, but are also on the easy side. Kagemaru in particular goes down like a chump nearly every time I fight him. It's really disappointing for a recurring boss. This strat shown is far from optimal. I purposely did a slower one, in fact, just so he'd be on screen a bit longer. The easiest strat is just to cancel your combo until he goes down. The Ninduo here are the only bosses I really had much trouble with because they attack you as a pair. That's mostly just in comparison to other bosses though. They're still pretty much on the easy side. Another boss that might give a first-timer trouble is Master, who is difficult to reach because he flies up the top of the screen. But like the clown that he is, he throws balloons on the ground, and this helps you reach him. Punch him just a few times, and he goes down like a total chump. As you progress into the game, stage hazards start appearing to try to slow you down as well, but they're usually slow and easy to avoid. And even if I did get hit, look at my 8 health bar. Jeez. I would like the game to have a hard mode. Maybe you could throw some more enemies on the screen, make the traps a bit more deadly, or make it so you can't exactly make a ton of infinite combos until the enemies die. Oh, make it so that the smiley face here instantly kills me! Haha, that'd be funny! But yeah, that's the only thing I really think this game lacks. It's otherwise real good fun. Something that puzzles me is the copyright year on this game. It's 1994, a year before the Satellaview actually came out. My suspicion is that the game may have been designed with a cartridge release in mind. It doesn't actually use that much that's very Satellaview specific. But I would imagine a game like Donkey Kong Country made them reconsider that notion. As I said before, Shubibaman Zero basically looks 8-bit. It would have stuck out like a sore thumb if it was pitted against Donkey Kong Country's cutting-edge graphics. I can imagine the developers taking one look at this game, and then one look at theirs, and going, "Oh man, we can't compete with that, yo." And meanwhile, also on the same year, Capcom released Mega Man X, which is, well, a true 16-bit Mega Man. I would imagine the 1-2 punch made them reconsider their release plans. The game ended up as a Satellaview download. Unfortunately, it suffered for it. Shubibaman Zero has that boot-up-based lockout DRM. Thank goodness for emulation. Let's pop back out this pro and con list again to abridge making my points, so to say. Among the pros, I like how the game controls. Running and jumping feel great. And putting in combos and special attacks also feels great. Basically, it controls really nice. And this lends it to have good gameplay. I also liked the boss designs. They were amusing set pieces that made me sometimes think of a Sonic game's set-piece-oriented boss. Also, while I didn't talk about it too much before, I really enjoy the soundtrack. There's quite a few rips of it going around YouTube, so I would suggest checking it out sometime. It's kinda difficult for me to put what else I like about Shubibaman Zero into words, but I feel like the whole package just clicks together into being something pretty satisfying. Or maybe I'm just some guy who likes games that look 8-bit. Who knows? Anyway, let's check out the list of cons that I wrote down. As I look back on them, they seem to feel more like my personal opinions than actual game flaws. For example, I think the game's too easy. I think the game might be being held back by its 8-bit graphics. And I think it could have used a different title because I don't really know what this has to do with the previous Shubibaman games. At least narrative-wise, anyway. The one thing I'd really hold as an absolute flaw is the Satellaview 8M Pack DRM. It has made collecting authentic copies of this game an absolute nightmare. I remember when Callus bought one off Yahoo Japan auctions, only to find that it was already locked because of the Satellaview's DRM. There was much weeping. As for who should play this and who should avoid it, this list is a bit shorter than a pros and cons list because, well, I personally believe that if you have the ability to play this, you should at least take a look at it sometime. It's easy to pick up and play, it's fun, and it justifies the existence of emulators. It's even easier to emulate than most Satellaview games. Just pop it in your favorite, and you're good to go! The redump of the ROM from Calyx's 8M is available on Satellablog, though the site kinda looks like a mess now. But anyway, I'm sure you know some other place to grab this. Huh? What do you say? That redump of Shubibaman Zero actually helped us figure out a bit about how the Satellaview's DRM worked, so it wasn't a complete waste. Still, to think Callus paid like $300 for that. I don't even have that kind of money now. The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask was developed in a year. The Wind Waker HD was done in about 9 months. But what about DS Zelda? To explain why I'm even considering this notion in the first place, let's flash back to the early days of BS Zelda ROM hacksing. Back when BS Zelda was first ROM dumped, there was a hack called the Roto Complete patch, which basically let Z-SNES users play the game. Once I got in this room though, it was all like, whoa, what is that weird glitchy thing doing here? Wah! The mystery of this placeholder data for a boss plagued the community for years. The ROM dump of BS Zelda currently circulating is from Episode 3, whereas that boss was only in a location accessible in Episode 4, it thus took many years for us to figure out that the blue manhandler was supposed to be there. But seeing the rest of that data available, why would that be missing? Unless the game was not even done by the time Episode 3 was sent to St. Giga? That, I admit, is nothing but speculation. And while my hyperbolic mind would like me to believe that the game is literally being coded as it was broadcast, that's probably not very likely. But there are several things that make me think that BS Zelda was developed on a much shorter time span than a typical Zelda game. I'll talk about a few of the reasons I think about in this video. I admit, these probably are not conclusive of anything, but I think this would open up a nice place to discuss and research this subject. I'm starting with a bit more about the actual game's programming. Well, besides what was already talked about. Prior to making this video, I tried looking up info on BS Zelda's development history on various websites, but mostly came up empty. Wikipedia's citations in particular are full of dead links. Ugh. But anyway, I did look up this Nintendo Power interview with Makoto Sasaki. The last two lines of this interview in particular interest me. A difficult programming project. The strain was incredible. The goal was to have no interactive lag. Oops? Or programming bugs. Mr. Sasaki, I'm sincerely sorry. But at the end of the day, small bugs are not a big deal. What's more off-putting to me about the coding of BS Zelda is basically how it doesn't really feel like NES Zelda at all when you get right down to it. I mean, sure, superficially it looks like an updated version, but pay attention to how the sword swings or how its collision detection works. Look at how the player character wraps around a block as he goes down instead of getting stuck on it like an NES Zelda. Check the differences in certain enemy behaviors, especially the fact that the Dongo can't be killed with a single bomb in any way possible. And how about the size of the boomerang and bombs? Oh, and the fairies too, yeah. In comparison to the ports of Mario games in Super Mario All-Stars, which played pretty similarly besides the obvious intentional changes, BS Zelda felt more like a game that was recoded by people who forgot some of the details of how the mechanics of NES Zelda worked. And then, in attempting to replicate them, the game somehow mutated into being something more like its own thing entirely. This is why I'd like to argue that BS Zelda is not a remake of NES Zelda by the standards of what Nintendo would consider a remake. The mechanics quite simply don't match up. It's as different as New Super Mario Bros. Is to NES Mario Bros. Lately, Nintendo has become known for surprise launches of games shortly after the announcement of their existence. But before then, they did that with BS Zelda. The first announcement about the game was published on Famitsu on July 21st, 1995, with information and screenshots coming just a week later. The game was set to start broadcasting in August, the following month. That's a very short time frame between announcement and release. Sounds kinda similar to how Nintendo handles their eShop releases. By the way, take a look at the screenshots. Then compare and contrast how they actually look in the game. Quite different, huh? Some different colors, some different graphics here and there. Everything just feels slightly off. And while many people believe these are prototype screenshots, why would you have prototype screenshots that look so different from the final game when it's mere weeks from release? Even I can't think out of a good answer to that question, and quite frankly, it seems unlike Nintendo in general. And when Nintendo is not being Nintendo, something strange is happening. Very strange. Speaking of things that are strange for Nintendo, let's check out the Soundlink audio.
赤い指輪は迷いの森の近くにポツンと立った石像の下。パワーブレスレットが必要だ。
Shut it, Jubei, you're wrong! There is absolutely no requirement to have the power bracelet in order to obtain the red ring whatsoever! And knowing this is pretty important for my single episode challenge run. One of the most un-Nintendo-like things I can think of is misdirecting the player with inaccurate information. Yet this slipped into BS Zelda. Another thing about the Soundlink that makes me think it was put together pretty quickly was the backstory used as the introduction. Or rather, how it was basically just a paraphrased version of The Link to the Past's backstory. Which doesn't even make sense when you consider that this is supposed to be NES Zelda? I know Miyamoto likes to say they're just the same story told in a different way, but that's going overboard with it. I feel as though many of the things I pointed out sound like they would fit the narrative of a game being rushed to market and having some elements overlooked. Thankfully, BS Zelda is still a really excellent game, but considering that, imagine what a few extra months of polish could have done. Obviously, the error in the Soundlink could have been fixed. Maybe Blue Manhandla could have been Gleeok instead. Maybe there could have been a real level 9. Or maybe the code could have been prepared for a cartridge release. Especially, you know, that one Nintendo Power tease that could have come out in America so we could probably play this game? On the other hand, if BS Zelda wasn't a rush game, then what would cause some of the issues that I pointed out? The game code, the Soundlink, and the promotional material all have separate and distinct issues. Perhaps Mr. Sasaki has those answers. If only I could talk to him someday. Or perhaps one of you commenters has those answers. Anyone want to comment? I always forget that E3 is total procrastination time for me. Have you been enjoying all the announcements? Ooh, there's been quite a few megatons launched so far. I'm pretty partial to Earthbound Beginnings. It gives me a lot of hope for BS Zelda. As I've come to correct information about the Satellaview in my research, I've learned that sometimes Nintendo themselves are the ones responsible for the misinformation. This video has some examples. Let's start by thinking back to the previous video I made. Remember this part? At first, I thought the line about players communicating with each other seemed like a mistranslation, but then I remembered back when Blue Sun translated for me some Satellaview History Museum archival data. This line here especially... Yeah, there's no more mistaking it from these translations. Nintendo wants people to believe that the Satellaview was a netplay experience. That you were competing against whoever they said you were competing against live. When I read lines like this, it makes me think that Nintendo wants people to believe that the Satellaview is like X-Band with its netplay features. Heck, at the time the X-Band was even around in Japan and making a bit of a splash. Nintendo may have wanted to undermine their success a bit. After all, nearly any modern-day online experience is at least slightly codified by X-Band. But while Nintendo claimed there was netplay on the Satellaview, everything they did to try to make people believe it was there was all smoke and mirrors. All archival footage of BS Zelda and other Soundlink games show that they're mostly single-player experiences. Sure, many of the games were competitive in some manner, but Usually, this consisted of submitting a password in snail mail, and that completely shatters the illusion that the Satellaview actually lets you send data to it. Very rarely did the Satellaview have a multiplayer game, period. As for Yuki's jigsaws, if it's anything like the Yuki no YY Kids ROM here, then Yuki is AI. And simply playing the game outside of the schedule would show it. I wouldn't be surprised in the least if people catching on to this eventually undermined the Satellaview's reputation. Yet regardless of that, Nintendo sticks to this story even long past the time the Satellaview's expired. This reminds me a bit too much of how next-gen gaming is. This next lie is for the ROM pirates.
なおこのゲームはゼルダタイムという時間空間にのみ存在するプログラムです。メモリーパックにセーブすることはできません。
Nothing in that memory pack, folks. Move along now. To keep players from trying to play Soundlink games during off hours, what Nintendo actually did was keep the game downloaded and then locked in the memory pack, unable to be played. But that data? It's still in there. Where do you think that BS Zelda ROM came from, after all? A memory pack that appears empty might just have a Soundlink game inside, just waiting to be ROM dumped and restored. Or it might have a chunk of the game that's not exactly complete, but very playable regardless. Or it might have one of those weird sound journal things with a lot of placeholder graphics that aren't downloaded. But either way, stuff is saved to the memory pack. Now let's move from blatant lies into delusions. Check out the last paragraph of that announcement article. Nintendo expects to sell 2 million Satellaview packages a year. For reference, that's about half of what the Famicom Disk System sold in its entire lifespan. Nintendo expected the Satellaview to outdo the Famicom Disk System in 3 years? Either Hiroshi Yamauchi was nuts, or he was full of it. And I think the latter. This Famitsu scan shows the launch broadcasts for the Satellaview. Notice a pattern? I sincerely doubt Nintendo expected to sell 2 million Satelliviews on Wario's Woods and Picross. Usually, Nintendo launches its hardware with a solid killer app. The fact that they didn't for the Satellaview tells me that they thought very little of it, even as they were trying to sell it. And now I'm gonna bring this up again. BS Zelda, Game Pack, North America. The following black screen pretty much shows what came of that. Absolutely nothing. Of Nintendo's entire library of Soundlink games, only Sute Hakun and Shin Onigashima got cartridge releases, and that's very disappointing. This last one requires some translating of Famitsu. It seems Nintendo was asked about compatibility with the Ultra 64 and Virtual Boy, and their answer implied that they were seriously considering it. This is really interesting to point out, realizing that the Satellaview was released in the midst of the 32-bit console wars. The Super Famicom was not planned to be supported much longer, so Nintendo would say, yes, we're planning N64 compatibility to get people to buy Satellaview anyway. And it seemed based on looking up the history that they kinda tried, but looking at it another way, they announced the 64DD shortly after the Satellaview's release. And the 64DD is a big elephant in the living room in regards to whether Satellaview would actually be compatible with N64 down the line. For all intents and purposes, it seemed like the 64DD was intended to replace the Satellaview entirely, as opposed to simply supplementing it. Also, much of what made the Satellaview special was kinda undermined by the N64, which already had voice-acted games. And if the ADM packs could not load Super Famicom data, what would be the point? Reading dinky magazines? If this was an actual plan, it was not very well thought out. Ugh, I sound more tired in this video than usual, don't I? I've been really busy. It's been pretty stressful, but I think I'll manage.